Hey everyone. All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. Hello and welcome to part 5 of our 2021 CTR series. My name is Casey Craig, and many of you know me as Stella's mom and the Cute Syndrome Foundation moderator and social emotional program director. We are back home from the hospital, and Stella apparently found out I was going to be on camera today and decided to wake up from nap early. So as any other SCNAA parent, I improvised, and she is here with me to say hello. Can you say hello? Say hi. She's thrilled. She really needs to be sleeping. So today we have the pleasure of having Praxis Precision Medicines with us here to talk about some of the first data that is coming out of the citizen effort we partnered on earlier this year. As a community, it's so exciting for us to hear feedback on the research efforts we support. So having them here today to share early stage feedback is remarkable. Before we get started, we do have a few housekeeping items. So group interaction through questions and/or comments will take place in the chat box only. The chat box is to your right and allows you to type questions and/or responses for Hillary or our friends with Praxis. If you're experiencing any technical issues, you may type a request for help in the chat box. Our fabulous technical guru, Megan Varner, will help you tackle any technical issues you might have today. I also want to extend a huge thank you to our platinum level CTR sponsors, Neurocrine and Praxis, for their continued support for our community. And don't forget, our final CTR meeting will take place next Wednesday at 12 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. We hope to see you there. Now I would like to introduce our very own Hillary Savoie. She is the director and founder of the Cute Syndrome Foundation, and I want to extend a huge thank you to Hillary on behalf of our community for the countless hours she put into making this CTR series come to life. It's definitely not an easy task, but as always, she rocked it. Without further ado, Ms. Hillary Savoie.
Hi, Casey. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, we can.
Hi, Stella. Thanks for joining, sweetheart. She's going to run the meeting, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, fantastic. Well, thank you as always, Casey, and so happy that Stella is home and able to join us today. We've all been thinking about her.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
All right. So welcome back, everyone. This is our next to last event in our CTR series in 2021. I cannot believe that. Last year, we did this series really with an eye toward explaining some of the basics of clinical trials. And this year, we've been really diving much more deeply into topics, discussing the specific ways that regulators think about trials in communities like ours, understanding the implications of different scientific approaches to the potential treatments at hand, and understanding the places that our experiences can help along the process of drug development, all the way through to regulatory education, commercialization decisions, payer engagement, and beyond. So we can't relax yet. To that end, I am so excited about today's topic because it's really digging into how, as a community, we can help ensure that the trials that are being designed for us are able to take the realities of our experiences into consideration. So today we have some very familiar faces from Praxis Precision Medicines on to talk about some of what they're learning and what they'll continue to learn from the data we helped them gather through our medical records on the Citizen platform earlier this year. And so with that, I would welcome Devra, Michael, and Kelly, if you guys are here and able to share your screens, to go ahead and pop on and join me. Hey, Devra.
Hi, how are you?
Well, thanks. How are you?
Well, thank you.
Hi, Michael. Nice to see you again.
Hello, you too.
Hi, Kelly.
Hello.
I'm so grateful that you guys are here to join us today. Thank you for taking the time.
Well, thanks for having us. We're really excited to be here too.
Yeah. And it's really lovely to have you guys all back on. I mean, our families have met you each during various virtual engagements. I get to see Devra every week. And Michael and I actually just got to meet in person for the first time, which felt like a really big win here in Boston last week. And Kelly and I haven't gotten to meet in person yet, but I know we will someday. But I know our families are familiar with all of you guys to a certain extent, but I'm hoping that maybe we can just start out with you guys each talking a little bit about who you are and what you do in relation to the SCNAA program, and maybe a little bit of why you do this work. So maybe Devra, do you want to kick it off?
Sure. So for anyone who hasn't seen me yet, my name is Deborah Densmore. I'm really glad to join you today. And I lead patient advocacy here at Praxis. So I actually get the privilege of working with Hillary and with families like yourself more closely so that I can hear what the individual needs are from you as parents, as community members, and what your child's needs are. And then I take those insights back to colleagues like Michael and Kelly and many others and help make sure that whatever decisions we make are kept with you in mind. So as we design studies or as we think about educational programs or as we think about future partnerships, it's with you in mind. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later on, but very excited. Thank you.
Thanks, Deborah. Michael, do you want to go next?
Sure. Thanks, Hillary. Good afternoon or good morning, anyone who's on the West Coast. My name is Michael Oldham. I am a pediatrician and child neurologist and pediatric epileptologist by training. I was in clinical practice for a while at an academic health center and seeing primarily patients with epilepsy and in particular neonates or infants with new onset epilepsy was a particular area of interest for me. And many years ago, I transitioned to working in the industry field and have been at Praxis now for coming up on almost a year, which is amazing. Time flies. But really just excited to, again, have an opportunity to chat with folks who are on the call today. As Deborah said, spending this time to listen and learn and bounce ideas is so fruitful for us, because certainly our biggest goal is bringing new therapeutics, but doing so in a way that gets answers and helps you all and the field writ large. So really looking forward to a great conversation today and want to thank you all for joining.
Thanks, Michael. And Kelly, I saved you for last because I think you have a pretty amazing connection to how you landed at Praxis. I know some of the families are familiar with it, but why don't you tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Sure. Thanks, Hillary. My name is Kelly Dalby. I've been at Praxis, I think, for about 2.5 years, maybe a little bit more now. I got involved with Praxis because I have a son with an SCN2A mutation, which is, we're learning more and more how incredibly similar it is to SCN8A. And I work in clinical operations, so I get to help set up clinical trials. And I've been very involved with the Citizen Initiative from the very beginning.
Thanks, Kelly. So I think that actually is a great segue to remind the families that what we're going to be talking about today is the citizen data that we helped gather last spring, and kind of, what this platform does and what it has enabled for you guys to be doing and thinking about doing. But again, just for a reminder for the families, this is a platform where those of you who signed up, some of you may not have, it's a kind of a very quick enrollment process. So you went in and you kind of gave permissions, and on the back end, Citizen collected your child's full medical records if you consented to enroll. And essentially those records are available to the patients for their personal use, but then also that data is collected across the group, and they're analyzing that data in order to help people like Praxis design better trials for our community, and then also to get that information out into the research community. And so we call it, or can call it, a retrospective natural history study. So essentially it looks back at all of this data that already exists. Your kids have already been poked and prodded and all that data exists, to try to help us understand the natural history of SCN8A. So today we have Praxis here to share some of that higher level learnings about the data. And families, I know I don't usually need to remind you to ask your questions, but go ahead and ask your questions in the chat as we go if you have them. And I'll lead off with just some discussion points to begin with, and then feel free, families, to interrupt with relevant questions as we go. Okay, so to start, when you guys planned to use Citizen, what were the kinds of questions that you were needing to ask or wanting to ask of data, and of the data you were hoping to gather, and why was this necessary?
Yeah, I can answer that. So I was actually introduced to Citizen about 1.5 years ago, and had a couple meetings with the company, and they did a few presentations on disease indications, not genetic epilepsies, and was really sort of interested in what they had to offer, but wanted to see how it would play out using like an SCN2A patient or an SCN8A patient. What were they able to learn from the medical records? Because at that time, I was of the mindset that you need to talk to the parent. That is the expert. That's who knows. They can tell you everything that you want to know. And then what we did is we used my son, who has an SCN2A mutation, as an example, like just to see the data that we would be able to get from this initiative. And so I consented my son in, and just immediately I was sort of blown away. And at the same time, in parallel, I was trying to collect all his medical records for a natural history study. And I was having a lot of trouble getting a complete data set from every single institution. I wasn't able to get a lot of his raw EEG tracings. It was just a very incomplete set, and I'm his parent. And within 30 days, Citizen had the majority of his medical records. They contacted me about 2 institutions that I had failed to remember that I took him to in his first year of life. And when I got the data set, I was actually learning new things about my son that was not what I remembered. For example, he had a movement disorder, and I remember that happening about 4 to 5 years old. And it was in his medical records that he had a specific movement disorder, choreoathetosis, at about 4 to 5 months old. And that was news to me. And so when they were presenting data about my son to a large number of people from the company, from Praxis, they completely nailed it. I mean, they were able to track his seizure frequency and what medication he was on that time to see when it was increasing or decreasing. They're aware of all the hospitalizations, all the EEGs, all of the other clinical diagnosis. We hear so much talk about 2A and 8A and seizures, but seizures is just one symptom among many troubling symptoms. And so like we were immediately impressed, and we ended up signing up a cohort with Citizen for 2A and 8A because we felt like it was so much quicker than a 5-year natural history study and waiting to take in all of that data. And the level of data we saw was it was really impressive from the beginning. And so we just got the complete data set for the SCN2A cohort. We've gotten a few data highlights from 8A, and we'll have a complete data set for 8A at the end of the year. So really excited to bring that back to the community and share everything we've learned.
And can you help just contextualize and why having something like a natural history study, why the choices were doing something like Citizen versus something like a 5-year long natural history study?
Yeah, Michael, do you want to answer that one?
Yeah, I can start, and others please add in. I think there are 2 big reasons. Number one is time. The 5 years is a lifetime, and that is really frustrating and painful. I don't have to say that. We want to move as quickly as possible, and waiting for years and years to collect data is an option. But when we realized and learned more about what Citizen does and this type of data collection, it was really appealing. Obviously there are positives to a prospective natural history, so like starting today and going forward. And the positives of that are that you can, at specified time points, always collect the same information, and so you can track that over time. And so a key argument or kind of poo-pooer to something like Citizen is that, oh well, you're looking backwards, different clinicians or places collect different kinds of information and in different ways. But we think that, one of the powers of this process and a way to mitigate that, negative is with just the sheer number and amount of information that we're able to collect. And, the overwhelming interest by you all in participating, was just like freaking amazing. Like we look, 82 patients, enrolled, and that is an enormous amount of data that we will ultimately be able to collect, and then that each of you will, have access to your own full record. So I think time is a key piece. There are ways to kind of deal with some of the negatives, if you will, of a retrospective or look back. I think the other big importance here of any kind of natural history study is just better understanding the underlying disease, whether it's SCN8A or any other disease for that matter, and especially ones that are rare. We have, as there are published reports in the literature from different clinicians and things, but oftentimes those are in isolation. And so being able to pull in a large set of individuals and look at, tons and tons of their information, it allows us to look at and everyone to better understand potential variability across individuals, but also commonalities. What issues are the majority of people having to deal with? And then that directly translates into what we study and also what we try to help create new therapies for.
So, Michael, thank you. And I'm going to quote you on our being freaking amazing. So that's officially
that's not actually what I wanted to say, but I tried to rein it in.
Well, I mean, you know how we roll here. Things are pretty casual. So.
But there are children on the line, so earmuffs.
So I think this is so interesting, and I just want to make sure that we pause to explain what you just said, finding potential variability and commonalities. I think for families, what we see is is a trial, right? It's done, it's designed, we show up or we don't, and we go through a process. But I think it's really, really important. I want to pause here to talk to the families about why potential variability and similarities are so important for you guys at the stage that you're at right now, as you're trying to figure out, essentially, you're setting up a scientific experiment, right? And you could have the best drug in the world, and if you set up the wrong experiment, it will look like it's not anything, right? So just if you could, Michael, kind of walk the families through the kinds of questions that you're looking at this data to answer in order to make decisions about a trial.
Yeah, I mean, I think one key piece is, I'll use seizures as an example because it's a relatively, easy example to use. But, and this will be kind of a broad response, but also can bring it back to SCN8A. But I think one thing that's really important with any kind of study that measures or asks people to document seizures is that we make sure we are asking people about the right type of seizure or the more commonly problematic seizures. So using the Lennox-Gastaut as an example, I mean, often a main type of seizure that is measured are drop attacks, because those are prevalent in LGS. They are easily countable, and they are problematic in the population because it can lead to significant injuries. But you wouldn't want to necessarily choose that as a primary endpoint or a major seizure type in other types of epilepsy. So it's really important to understand the true characteristics of the disease and the type of epilepsy to make sure that that is what you're choosing as your primary endpoint, that you're going to the FDA and saying, hey, this is what we want and plan to measure. Do you agree with that it's meaningful and important? And so that's where, again, looking at different kinds of information and fully understanding, what a patient experiences is critical to study design.
Fantastic. Thank you. And I know we've got some questions queuing up. Before we get to them, I just want to ask one more question that I think will help to then contextualize some of these. Now that you guys have like the beginnings of, so you have the complete set of 2A, you have the beginnings of the 8A data, and you're starting to dig into that. Obviously, you have some high level stuff. I'm hoping you can throw some numbers at us and some information that you're finding. But also, I guess, based on what you are seeing, what are you hoping that a more complete analysis will tell you?
I mean, right now, all we've gotten from Citizen is about a dozen preliminary information from 8A. So it's barely scratching the surface. We're really waiting for the end of the year when we get a complete data set of 82 patients. So looking forward to learning a lot more about the 8A population through the Citizen lens.
I know Deborah had mentioned that you guys have numbers of hours, things like that.
Yeah, I can give some of those now if you want, Deborah and Kelly, with that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. So as I mentioned, there are 82 patients whose data are being actively collected. Some of the details that we do have are, of those 82 patients, 72 have a history of seizures or epilepsy. And of those 72, 13 actually have a history of infantile spasms. So again, a robust number of people whose information we'll be collecting, both with seizures and, 10 without a history of seizures, which is also, nothing to turn our noses up at. So I think that's really great. Of the 82 patients, it appears as if there are 67 unique genetic variants, which is also interesting in that it shows the breadth of different genetic variants that there are, but there are several recurrent variants. So it's not huge numbers, but there are several that are recurrent that, depending on what we get back, we might be able to look at trends within those specific variants, which will be really good and interesting to highlight. And then the other big number that I wanted to mention is that all total, if you look at the number of patients who enrolled, so 82, and looking at their age at the time that you all enrolled your children, we have over 650 life years of data from, I don't have an exact number of how many different institutions, but I will imagine it's, probably over 100 different institutions if I had to make a guess, which I think is really, super remarkable. And just the breadth of info and I know, Hillary, you said we'll get to questions, but I might actually just take a second there to use that to point or to begin to answer a question that it looks like Tyler posted, which I think is really important and touches on something that a term that you as families may have heard that we used in the clinical space, and that's something called chart lore. So early on, a diagnosis gets added or a comment is made, and then it just gets copied forward from note to note to note. And you see that and you're like, that didn't happen. What the heck is this talking about? So this type of data collection certainly has a potential risk of there being errors or incorrect information. But I think one, again, mitigating strategy for that is the fact that it's collecting and hopefully and ideally as much and all of the data from each individual patient. And the Citizen platform is established to really closely go through and in various ways assess the data and looking for particular pieces of information. Now, is it absolutely foolproof and if something is in there that might be incorrect, that is certainly a possibility we have to consider. But again, I think within an individual patient, but also looking across multiple people, the hope is that the amount of data and the power of that will allow for any of these potential errors to be dampened or offset.
And I think that's very helpful, and it ties nicely into Michelle's question above, which is about how frequently we should be updating this information. And I'm going to guess the answer is it depends on how the information is being used, whether it's the goal is for personal use, or if they were to update their data right now, it would not affect the data set that you're about to receive. Is that correct?
That's correct. It won't affect our data set.
Okay, so Michelle, if you're wanting to continue to update, it will update what you have access to, and then also researchers who come behind who are asking for additional data sets, it will affect that as well. So I think probably at the rate at which, Kelly, what do you think? Like the rate at which she'll find it useful for her child's care? Is that?
Yeah, and probably doing every 6-month refreshes. I mean, that's what I'm personally doing.
Okay, that's helpful.
Mm-hmm.
And it looks like, so Shelley is asking, are there key variabilities or similarities that have been found within the data that you can share with us?
For 8A specifically,
get off mute. Oh. Go ahead, Kelly. Sorry.
I was going to say for 8A specifically, we're premature at this point. So when we have our complete data set, absolutely. Have we found that in 2A? Completely. So within different subgroups of 2A that directly relate to loss of function, gain of function is contingent on time and type of seizure onset. And then we're seeing specific comorbidities attached to those phenotypic groups. So it's been incredibly insightful. And looking to learn the same thing from 8A when we have our complete data set and share that with you.
Yeah, if you don't mind, if I could build on that, is one of the main goals for us today to make sure that you as families know is, one, just how meaningful your participation has been for this, but also that we're promising to you that there will be a feedback loop. Your data did not go into a black box, that we will be sharing it through many different opportunities, including publications, infographics, and ways that you can feel connected to the work that you're doing, because this truly is, I think, a combined effort as a community to help drive understanding in science forward. So we want you to know that as we get that data, we'll be figuring out ways with Hillary and with you about how we can share that out, because you are one of the key partners that we know have given so incredibly much to this, and the success of the knowledge that we now hope to have is because of your participation. So we want to make sure that you know what the outcomes are from what we're learning. So please know that that is definitely part of our thought process, is once we have that complete data, how can then we begin to message it out to you, to researchers, to the community to help drive science forward. But you are certainly one of the groups that is a priority for us to make sure that you know about what we're learning, because we want you to learn too.
And I'll just add one other thing, and it was a comment from the genetic counselors at Citizen that are the ones going through and extracting data from the medical records. But they let us know that there's quite a few other genetic epilepsies on the Citizen platform, but they said that the SCN2A patients and the SCN8A patients are going much more often to the neurologist. They're admitted to the hospital a lot more frequently. They have a higher seizure frequency count. They have a lot of other comorbidities, that it's a lot, both of these 2A and 8A, much more severe, a lot longer medical records than what they've seen prior with the different DEs.
That is incredibly fascinating.
Mm-hmm.
So let's talk about with that piece of information. And I think, so this has got to be, I'm sure there are a bunch of parents on the other side of this that we can't see who are nodding their heads and saying, yeah, I kind of feel like we do go to the hospital a whole lot compared to other groups potentially. So with that piece of information, there's a couple of ways that little bit of nugget of information can be actionable. Can we sort of like slice that out? Like, one way is to make an argument for an unmet need, right? So let's talk that through. What does that look like?
Yeah, I think one of the things that in going through the 2A data, the SCN2A data, and then I think will be really key as we look through the totality of the SCN8A data is to look at trends over time. So for example, are the biggest concerns, are the major drivers of care early in life, for the first months, the first 2 years, however you define that, is that different than maybe say a 8, 9, 10-year-old child? So one piece that will be, I think, critical to understand is are seizures maybe earlier in life or around the time of diagnosis kind of the biggest deal? But then, the needs later are, yes, seizures are still problematic, but communication and Tammy asked about this, like gastrointestinal issues and nutrition, is that more like rising to the top of the list, if you will? And so I think that, to get back to your question, Hillary, understanding potential trajectories of need allows for better like targeting of interventions. And so I think those are some of the key features that we hope to evaluate once we do get all of the data. And, the different symptoms, and then also evolution of medications used. Something else that we learned is that a lot of the medications that people are on, in later childhood, they're only on because, doctors like me prescribed you medicines that resulted in a side effect that you need another medicine for. And so if there's a way to do better earlier, it could significantly reduce that, the impact of having to be on a whole bunch of meds.
It seems like my brain is going also to a lot of like healthcare economic studies here to help make the argument for, because I think, again, for the families, when you start to think about here, we've worked all these years toward a clinical trial, which is very exciting, but on the other side of a clinical trial is then approval, and then actually getting that drug in our children and proving that to our insurance companies that they need to pay for it, that they need to cover it. And I'm seeing here, potentially really good information to help make very clear arguments for avoiding hospitalizations long-term, as well as the costs associated with not just having a child hospitalized, meaning the hospital costs, but all of the other pieces that fall around that when you have a really fragile child.
I think that HEOR data that you're talking about is going to be very, very important. Of course, right now, as we think about clinical research, that's where we're thinking about immediately. But the potential of this data set is so incredible. And so, thinking back on the European conference that happened just a little while ago, and the presentation on health economics data was really, really powerful. And the great thing about Citizen is that it can be accessed by researchers with IRBs, with other opportunities to learn more and leverage that data in ways that can be meaningful for the community beyond perhaps the clinical research that we're taking on. So that's, I think, the potential is just so incredible. And so as we think about the ways that this data can be used, we should never limit ourselves for just one topic or one area. It can be used for so many different things. And that, again, is so critical to why your participation was so important. Because, again, to what Michael said earlier, the more people that participated, the greater the power of the data, and the greater that data will benefit both the community as well, meaning parents, but and families, as well as patients, and then ultimately for greater understanding and ways to make barriers hopefully not as difficult to overcome, or understanding from decision makers who can really change with policy or the swipe of a pen what the outcomes for us will be as a community, whether it's in a decision of approving a therapy or covering a therapy, or even creating policies that help with access to therapies, like what the programs are, or the processes are, or the policies are that impact all of us as a community. So that's so incredibly powerful that your data could be potentially used in that way too. It goes beyond just a clinical trial into so many things. So again, the number of you that participated was just incredible, and it will be helpful beyond what we're thinking about today.
And can you tell us, so as you say, one of the reasons that this was such a powerful process to go through as a community is that it isn't data that we collected just for you guys to use. It's data that can and will move in multiple directions, and it won't get tied down. So what is the timeline? You guys get the full data set by the end of the year. What's the timeline for then, that we could say to researchers or clinicians, here's this data set that you can access?
It's right around that same time. So it's a matter of the researcher, and again, with an IRB approved study, reaching out to Citizen, and then they will get access to that data, the same data set that we have.
Okay, fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think one of the funny things about data also, when you actually start dealing with the rubber meets the road on this side of it, is that data, once you get a data set, you tend to realize the things that you don't know and you now don't have information on, and you need to gather that information. And I think from a family perspective, that can be frustrating because people keep coming to you for more information. But maybe you can help kind of contextualize, this data effort in the context of other data gathering efforts, and what blanks may need to be filled in, what kinds of questions this data set can't answer just by virtue of its nature.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just speak to what we've seen so far on the 2A cohort. So what we're looking to do, and Citizen has this ability in their platform where if we want to go back to families, or anyone wants to go back to families, to send a survey if we want more clarity on certain things, or for example, what we're about to do in 2A, as well as what we will be doing in 8A, a 30-day seizure diary. So we can look at 30 days current seizure frequency, type of seizure, just to enrich the current data set that we have.
And then to build on what Kelly was saying, so Hillary, you bring up an excellent point, and it is certainly not lost on us how many times we keep going to this incredible well of knowledge, and how many asks we've had of the community. It's a lot, but you all, I think, to Kelly's point much earlier, is that you are experts in ways that others are not. You have just a rich understanding of what your child experiences that no one will ever really know other than you, which is why we come back to you so much, and why we rely on Hillary to let us know what the pace and cadence of that should be so that the well never runs dry. And one of the things that we really appreciate is to get to some of the things that we may not understand through Citizen. For example, you may recall just recently the formulation survey. We learned an incredible amount from you understanding like what your preferences were, and not even preferences, but kind of your needs. Like, how do you need to have a medication administered in order for you to be able, for your child to benefit from it? And so that was incredibly powerful. We may not get that same kind of insight from the data that we collect from Citizen. That's not saying that it's not good. It's just that with everything, there may be some limitations. And so coming back to you with a question around that could be really powerful again, so that we don't accidentally make assumptions based on limited understanding or limited context. You help to contextualize and build out for us true, meaningful understanding so that we are intentional in the best way as we make decisions with you in mind. And just to let you know, hopefully as a way to reflect that back, to you, in December, we will have a poster on the formulation survey that TCSF was able to put together, so as to not only to thank you, but to amplify the outcomes for that and make it so that it can be seen by many folks, including this community at the event in December. So we want to let you know that that's one of the ways we're hoping to reflect back out to you, whether it's the citizen data or surveys you take or many other ways you help to contribute to the dialogue that we're hearing, we're processing, and then we're hopefully reflecting back.
Thanks, Deborah. Yeah, that is very exciting. And Deborah and I were actually strategizing over, moving posters and how to make sure that everything gets where it needs to be for AES so that we can all see it. And as you all know, that is AES this year will be a little bit of a moving target for being a hybrid event for our community. And I think it's really interesting from where I sit to see how you guys are able to piece together these different types of data sets and learn from them. And I think, again, I said this when I spoke in Europe 2 weeks ago or whenever that was, 3 weeks ago, and that I think our families tend not to realize how extraordinary it is that they respond in the ways that they do to sharing information, or that we happen to have partners who want us to give them that information early and often. And to have something like a formulation survey be looked at by a team at this stage, and then coupled with this powerful data set that you're seeing that may give you insight that we wouldn't have known how to ask for. Ideally, this means that you're making decisions now that will not be problems down the line, which is really amazing. And from our side, we just won't see it because it'll just work well.
I think it also gives us, going back to your previous question, Hillary, about, what do we not necessarily get out of Citizen, or how can it help guide us if it's not there? And that, it goes back in my mind also to the idea of what we can find that's common across various SCN 8A patients. And then if it is not something that's readily known or understood, because that happens a lot. Families may be kind of struggling in isolation and not realize that there's, 15 other families saying, holy crap, yes, I have the exact same issue. And so if we can better understand that through something like Citizen, or at least see that there's something common, we can then, build that into, kind of going back to what this series is, we can build that into something that is assessed in a clinical trial to help really add knowledge to that. We can, make that information known so that families can ask their healthcare providers about assessing, X issue, like, for example, many children, as you all know, have sleep issues. Well, that's a big topic. Is it falling asleep, staying asleep, not sleeping ever at all for days? So if there can be, fine tuning of the symptom And then that can lead to better ways to assess and intervene. So it may not be readily apparent or available in something like the citizen data set, but it can at least like push us in a particular direction that's worth evaluating further.
Yeah, and I think that's what that interplay between various data sets that contain different information is so key, because as you say, if we ask a question like in a survey series about sleep, you can then go back to that citizen data, and presumably there will be some of that granularity, and that can help you better work out what questions to ask.
Yeah. Or if there's not, to know to ask those questions in a different way, you know?
Exactly. So I know you guys, because I've talked to you about this, I know you guys are all really excited about this data. I wanted to ask what you found most exciting about it.
I mean, I'll talk because I'm very excited about this. So when I was going through the data set initially, it was like it's so robust. You have so many choices of how to arrange it. So you can do what's typically seen about, median age of seizure onset or other comorbidities. But what I was really struggling with is, how do we present this data so that people that aren't as closely tied to A or 2A as I am as a parent or you are as a parent, how do we make them understand the severity of this disease? And so the idea that we had is, let's do a patient journey and show chronologically, step by step, every single thing this patient has experienced from the time of the first record till present day. And it brought some people to tears at our company, to like, you felt like you were on their journey with them. And just like every symptom, every hospital visit, every ER visit, every like new symptom, every new medication tried, every new medication failed, the number of medications that are piled on some of these kids, and then the symptoms of the disease, and then the symptoms of the medication, and needing another medication to like for a symptom of a medication. So I was really excited about that, just like to stand in the shoes of this child or this like parent, to see what we go through. And this data allows us to do that, as well as like sort the facts as is traditionally seen.
Yeah, I think it's also been really, and will continue to be interesting to try to tell the real story of some of these rare diseases like SCN2A and 8A. There's so many times myths that are potentially perpetuated because information is only based on a small number. Things like, I honestly can't tell you how many times people, clinicians have said to me, wow, you're studying, those disorders, like those kids don't seize that much after 5 or 6 years of age. Like, you're going to have a hard time finding people to be in your studies. Well, yeah, that's not true. So, information gathered like this can, again, really put to bed some of these like myths, really, is, for lack, I think that's the best word to them.
Yeah.
Then one of the things that I'm really excited by, and when I hear Michael and I hear Kelly talk, it gets me even more excited. But my job is to collect stories and to find platforms for those stories to be told. And Hillary, something that you said in Europe and that you mentioned here today, that was really important for me to hear as an outsider, was the validation that every story has power, that individually it has power, collectively it has infinite power. And this is just another platform for those stories to be told, so that those stories can then amplify and amplify and amplify the messages that Michael has addressed, that Kelly has addressed, so that change can happen through the amplification. Because one voice can be important, many voices can be even more important. A cacophony changes. And so I want you all to know that I'm excited by the change that you will help guide because of that cacophony. This is another platform for you to have amplification and the power of your voices to be heard. So that's what excites me by this.
And
that's
think
what excites me about the 8A community too, is like really we wanted to fill a cohort of 50 patients and we had a month to do that. And like you guys filled it in 2 days. Like and seeing that type
one morning.
I mean, seeing that type of excitement and participation like gets us even more excited. So it's incredible. You have an incredible community.
We do. We have an absolutely incredible community that continues to floor me every single day. And yeah, I do know that Citizen, by the way, is using us as an example of a community that did this really well. And they timed it. My hour count is different from their hour count, but they called it, because they called it from beginning of the workday at Pacific time. So they said it was 3 hours. I think it was 6, but that was still pretty fast. And I think what's, one of the things also that's interesting to me about this particular platform and this particular approach is that, nearly everything that we've been talking about with respect to this data is about sharing. And I think that that's another, historically, data, had tended to be gathered very, very slowly and sit in places, and it takes a long time to get a publication. It takes a long time to share. And so even knowing what is in a data set could take ages. And it is, I think, a really exciting time that we closed this cohort we opened in April, we closed in the second cohort in July, June? I thought
it was August.
It might have been August. It might have been August. Yeah. And we already have data that's on the edge of being shareable. And again, I think for our families, that's not something that happens in every community. And we really are at the sort of the pinnacle of speed for something like this happening. So what other pieces of information? I think that this is really interesting to look at how we have individual stories, like you've talked about this patient journey, which I know the families will be very excited when we get to see an 8A patient journey. But so extending from like that very individual process, right? So that's a story that can move people, but it also presumably shows points where intervention is possible. What other things looking at that level can you find that's really helpful?
One thing that was insightful to me is one patient, for example. So there's so much talk about age of seizure onset. And there was one patient, and a few are like this, where they were in and out of the hospital very frequently the first 6 months of their life prior to seizure onset, with failure to thrive, with GERD, with vomiting, with constipation. And these are longer hospital visits, and then needing a G-tube surgically implanted, again, prior to seizure onset. So that kind of information is really insightful, is really helpful. And this one patient that I'm talking about, there were several others like that, where they didn't present with seizures right at birth. It was mid-infancy, but still having so many symptoms of the disease prior to seizure onset.
Oh, that's really interesting. And potentially important clinical care piece to make sure that other specialists are educated. And we often think about clinical care as educating the neurologist, that then they need to get other specialties involved. But the idea of isolating other specialties that might need to be looking out for a potential seizure onset is huge.
Right. And can we get to the point of diagnosing even earlier, right, before seizure onset, when there's certain symptoms and comorbidities that are seen in multiple patients?
Yeah, that's fantastic. And Michael, I'm going to put you on the spot here because Tyler put you on the spot.
I saw
Good job,
that.
Tyler. I'll call you later to thank you. So,
like, you bribed him to say that or ask that. I will answer that, but I wanted to follow up real quick on the last question too. Is that, and something that I think will be really important as we get all of the SC and 8A data to look at is, going back to this idea of fully characterizing the burden of disease. And one thing that we saw in other cohorts was and this is like, I realize a really hard and sad topic, but the number of patients and the frequency of bouts of status epilepticus was astounding. The majority of patients in the 2A cohort had at least one recorded episode of status epilepticus. One patient, and I'm forgetting how old they are, but they had recorded, and who knows if there maybe are missing cases, 33 hospitalizations for status epilepticus. And that's horrible. Like, we have to do better. And so looking at things like that again are incredibly gut-wrenching, but I think are incredibly important to fully highlight the difficulties and the impact that something like SCN8A or 2A can have, and the importance of us reaching our goals to have better therapies.
I think hearing you say that, Michael, it makes me think about something very particular about the experience of sitting in the seat where you interact with families every day and you see what they're going through, and then looking at publications and looking at what medical professionals and researchers perceive of the disease, and how much friction there is between those two things. And part of how I have perceived my role is to be a storyteller about those realities and stand up in rooms and say, no, this is the reality. These are put yourself in this mother's shoes, put yourself in this child's shoes. But to have the specificity that is hard data, right? You cannot argue with the number of hospitalizations on that list. You cannot argue with the status length. You cannot argue with those things. Combined with the power of what that could feel like. And I think our families normalize these things, right? They're in the hospital. They're not, when they're filling out patient-reported data, which is very important and powerful, and please all keep doing that. I see all of you. You guys minimize what you're going through pretty consistently, and to your doctors. You go to your doctors, and so if you were doing a prospective natural history study, I can see them, not minimizing to pretend it didn't happen, but it's just normal. Oh, another seizure. What's is it a horrible seizure? Is it an okay seizure? Is it what do these things mean? And to be able to attach data to that story is incredibly powerful.
Yep, could not agree more.
And so on the heels of saying we have to do better.
Yes, so Tyler, that was not a dodge of your question, I promise. Let's bring everybody to tears so I can avoid answering his question. We actually are, fully on target with what we have been communicating, and hope to, in the first part of next year, begin a study in patients. We will later this year start the kind of clinical trial startup process. So beginning to talk to different potential sites, getting things onboarded for them to be ready to go. And so again, very much and fully on our target in terms of timelines, which we're really excited about. So
that's great. We like to hear on target for timelines. And of course, you all know this, but we'll say it publicly. To the extent that you need us to help in that process, to provide feedback, we're here. Families, I'm going to be bugging you for more information. So because we want to be sure that you guys design the best possible study and that we have the best possible shots at doing better, as you said. So on that note, I think we can wrap up this meeting. I know it's a little past 1, and I just wanted to thank you guys again for taking the time out to come and speak with us and share what you know. It's really important for our families to see your faces and to hear directly from you, and to know that you're thinking about them throughout this process. So, and families, again, I think it's just another fantastic reminder that our efforts of a community, as a community, are deeply appreciated and powerful. And we have to just keep it up. So with that, I also just want to, as last week, we have a lot of kids in the community who are struggling, and I just want to also take a moment to acknowledge that and let our families know that we're all thinking about them. So thank you guys again for being here today. Thanks to the TCSF team, Casey, Megan, Shelley, keeping everything up and running as always. And thank you again to our event sponsors, both Praxis and Neurocrine. And next week, we're going to meet here again for a discussion with Neurocrine about their SCN8A clinical trial, which is starting sort of currently in the next little bit. So we will see you next week, same time, same place. Bring your questions, and we'll have another great discussion.